Welcome back to our channel. Today, we've got some incredible stories lined up for you that you won't want to miss. So sit back, relax, and get ready for some captivating stories. Let's dive in. Story 1. So, this happened back during the time the first Pokemon movie came out in 1999 when I was 11. I had a friend. Let's call him Charlie. Charlie was a spoiled kid in an upper middle class family. Charlie was the type of kid who called his mom a witch and told his parents to be quiet. The worst part is, all his mom would do is yell at him with no real punishment, no timeouts, let alone a spanking. My family was a typical poor Asian immigrant one. We bought only essentials and never really had any toys growing up. When the first Pokemon movie came out, there was a special Mewtwo card made for that movie. In order to get this card, you had to spend $30. It was the pride and joy of Charlie. One day, I came over to Charlie's house, and he was showing me the card for the first time. He said how cool it was and just loved how shiny it was. Then he looked at me and said, "But you'll never get one because your parents are poor, haha." We had been friends for 4 years, and something in me snapped when he said that. I loved my parents, and even at a young age, I could tell how hurt my mom would get when they couldn't afford Christmas presents for us. Just then, his mom yelled for us to get ready because my parents were there to pick me up. Charlie then left the room to use the washroom, and I took that opportunity to pocket the Mewtwo card. I then went into the bathroom after Charlie came out and flushed the card down the toilet. My parents came to pick me up, and it wasn't until that night that Charlie's mom called my parents and told them Charlie was crying because I stole his card. I told my mom I never stole it because, technically, I didn't. I let my mom look through my collection of cards and everywhere in my bedroom because I knew she'd never find it. I'm 33 now and still laugh at this memory from time to time. I told my parents when I was in my 20s, and they just laughed and said, "Good." Edit. When we were in high school, Charlie fought my best friend Clint. Charlie lost, but got nothing but a cut lip. The next day, Charlie's mom waited outside the school and attacked Clint as he walked home. Clint just shoved her on her butt and laughed at her. Lucky for her, Clint never called the police on her. Charlie became the joke of our school for having his mom literally fight his battles for him. So, Charlie and I still have mutual friends. A couple of weeks back, we were talking about Charlie. I guess Clint gave him a complex because he grew up to be your typical rig worker. He owns multiple pit bulls to look tough, drives a lifted pickup with massive tires that never leaves the pavement. I wish I could show you all his Facebook. It's hilarious. Story 2. A little bit of background. When I was about 14, I got into forging knives with the most basic equipment, literally just charcoal and fire bricks for the forge and a hammer and tongs for my actual equipment. I've been doing this for roughly 6 years, once or twice a week. When COVID-19 started, I had a whole lot more time on my hands as my work was closed for 4 months, but reopened with limited hours. So, now I had more time but still had income. So I decided I'd put a little money into my forge equipment. This happened last week. Out of courtesy to my neighbors, I told all my neighbors that I'd be making more noise as I was increasing the frequency that I use my forge since I got new equipment. All of them were fine with it, one of them being excited as he wanted me to make him a knife all except one, my next-door neighbor who I'll call Karen. Now, Karen used to be friendly toward my family until about 4 years ago, due to her not respecting our political views. So, we stopped inviting her over and tended to avoid her since she'd try to make arguments at every turn. At most, I'll say good morning and ask, "How are you?" Anyway, I'm kind of off track. The issue she had with it was, "I don't want you polluting my yard with the smoke it's gonna make." Despite me explaining it's a propane forge and it doesn't produce much, if any, smoke, she still demanded that I don't do it. I ignored that, of course, as she cannot tell me what I can and can't do on my property. And it was really just a formality to let my neighbors know. So, I set up my forge in my backyard, put down gravel so there wasn't any fire hazard, lined it with bricks, and was putting the forge together and fixing it to the large flat stone I decided to set it on. She came over as I was doing this, walked into my backyard without me noticing, and opened with, "I said you can't do that." I jumped as I had no clue she was there, and that's when the fun started. She began yelling about how I said I wouldn't put anything back there I didn't and how she'd get the homeowners association involved, of which our neighborhood doesn't have one. When I informed her of that, she threatened to call the police, which was ridiculous. I responded with, "Get off my land before I call the police on you." She left, and I kept setting up my forge. A week passed, and I used the forge without issues. 2 days ago, I was working on my first knife out of it when a guy walked up to my fence and asked if I was the homeowner. I responded yes, looked up from my forge, and saw who was about 50 feet away on the sidewalk with her arms crossed and a smug look on her face. Karen. So I asked what I could do for him, and he said, "I'm with the county. I'm a building inspector, and I got a report from your neighbor that you were building a permanent structure without a permit." I said, "No, the last thing I built was this," and gestured at my forge. He looked around and said, "Are you planning on building anything or expanding any existing structure?" I responded, "No." He simply wrote it down and asked what it was. We chatted about the forge for about 15 minutes before Karen, irritated because I wasn't getting in trouble, stormed over and, in her shrill, annoying voice, demanded, "What are you doing? He broke the county ordinance, so make him get rid of it." The following conversation was essentially just, "No, I didn't." "Yeah, nothing's wrong here," the man told her. It ended with her walking off and then driving off in her SUV. The inspector was cool, and we chatted for a bit longer. Cut to yesterday. I walked out to start the forge, and while I was getting ready to start the propane, I noticed something pretty important. The line feeding into my forge was cut, and the bracket and copper tube on the tank were bent inwards, with one of the bricks from the border of the gravel laying about 6 feet away in the grass. I was confused for a minute before realizing what happened here. I took out my phone to check my backyard motion camera to see if there was any movement. Sure enough, there was movement through the night. The normal wildlife, a fox, 2 raccoons running outside, a house cat, and Karen walking into my backyard with what looked like garden shears. About 5 minutes later, she was jogging out of my yard. So, after downloading the footage to my phone and computer, taking pictures of the damage, and ordering new parts for my forge, I called the non-emergency police number and talked with the police. I shared the footage with them, and they wrote down some information and walked over to her house to get an explanation. She just yelled at them until they had heard enough and placed her under arrest, which didn't exactly calm her down, as she was wailing and screeching like a banshee the whole way to the car, yelling some pretty harsh words at me, the officers, and another neighbor as he walked out and asked me what was happening. As of right now, she's facing 1 charge of breaking and entering, 1 charge of vandalism, 1 charge of disorderly conduct, and 1 charge of resisting arrest, as she kicked one of the officers while they put her in the car. I have an appointment with a small claims lawyer tomorrow, and my dad and I have been laughing so hard at how crazy she was. And to Karen, if you see this, as I know you're on Reddit, I'll see you in court. Hope your night in the county jail was pleasant. Story 3. In college, there was a snobby guy named Joey who thought very highly of himself just because he had rich parents. He was the type of guy who broke up with a girl just because he found out she lived in a middle-class neighborhood and didn't wear the right name brands. In fact, he was so stuck up, he thought he could juggle 3 girls at the same time and not get caught. Well, he got caught. All 3 girls learned what he was doing and conspired to get him back. There was this big Halloween party at a sorority house, and they had a silly tradition where lots of guys volunteered to get placed inside what were basically plexiglass cages, plexiglass boxes just big enough for 1 person to stand in and get put on display for the party guests to look at and vote up or down. The winning guy with the most upvotes got a free phone. One of the 3 girls Joey cheated on convinced him he had a very good chance of winning. She told him how popular he was with the ladies and how everyone was hoping he would compete so they could vote him up. Joey was so convinced he had a great shot at winning, so he signed up. He even came dressed in a toga costume that he had spent around $1,000 on, getting it custom made for him. You should have seen him at the party with his nose in the air, thinking he was just the greatest thing ever. What he didn't know was that the 3 girls he was juggling had somehow managed to get word out to almost everyone at the party about Joey and his snobby ways and his womanizing ways. When it came time for the walk, he was locked inside one of the plexiglass cases, and all the female guests lined up to walk past and vote up or down. Imagine Joey's surprise when the first 3 girls in line were the 3 girls he was cheating on. Of course, all 3 girls voted him down. That was probably humiliating enough, but then he had to stand there locked behind the glass and watch every girl at the party vote him down too. Girl after girl filed past him, including cheerleaders and sorority sisters, and all the girls guys like to impress, and they all cast their downvotes. Many of them were making faces and gestures at him and laughing. Joey turned so bright red. He tried to get out of the box, but the door which was behind him was locked. So he tried to bump his butt against the door over and over to jar it open. From the front, that only made it look like he was humping up against the glass or something. He was making himself look even more foolish, and everyone was totally enjoying his comeuppance all the more. He was left in the glass case as the winner was announced, which obviously was not him since he didn't get a single upvote. When he finally was let out, everyone was cheering and clapping while he walked out. Believe it or not, he actually dropped out of college a few days later. Do you think it was because he didn't want to show his face around there anymore? I would say so. Story 4. Note: my dad manages several bars and restaurants in our area. I look older than I really am to some people, possibly because I'm tall for my age. I don't know. This lady is in her late 40s or early 50s. She picked a table that hadn't been cleared yet, although there were several other open seats. I wasn't wearing a shirt. However, I did have my dad's hat. He had to go grab something from the office, so he plopped his hat on my head and told me he would be right back. I was playing on my phone, waiting for my dad, when this lady coughed loudly at me. I looked up, and she pointed at the table. I was slightly confused, and she was drumming her fingers on the table impatiently. So, I asked her, "Is there something someone can do for you?" "Yes," she said huffily, "they can clean off this table." I looked around and saw everyone was at one of their tables at the moment, so I told her there were several other tables open. She rolled her eyes and said, "Well, I want to sit at this one." My parents taught me to be polite and how to deal with difficult people. So I told her, "Ma'am, every server is busy with one of their tables right now. If you could sit at a table that's cleared, I'm sure someone will get to you in a moment." "You aren't busy," she snapped at me. I asked her, "What makes you think I work here?" She rolled her eyes and said, "That hat," like it was the most common knowledge to exist. She told me to go make her a drink. I told her, "I can't." She glared at me and said, "That is ridiculous," and demanded I go make her a drink. I told her again, "I can't. I'm underage and don't work here." She asked again that I clear the table and get her a drink. I didn't have a problem giving someone a hand, especially the people that work in the restaurant with my parents. I knew most of them well. So I told her I would be glad to help one of the servers clear the table so she could sit, but I told her again I couldn't get her a drink. She sighed, clearly very aggravated. I grabbed the plates, took them back, and wiped off the table. One of the dishwashers, who I had hung out with a couple of times, asked me who my friend was. He was joking, and I explained she thought I worked there. He laughed and told me to make her a drink and see what happened. I raised an eyebrow at him, but he shrugged and told me it would be funny. I shrugged. I went behind the bar and made the only thing I knew how to, a Shirley Temple. I made the Shirley Temple and started to bring it to the lady. She had sat down and was on her phone, very irritated. I gave her the Shirley Temple. She took one sip and asked me what it was. I told her it was a Shirley Temple. She asked me why in the world I brought that to her. I told her, "You asked for a drink from a minor that doesn't work here." I paused and asked her what she expected. One of the waitresses, who actually worked there and could go behind the bar and make drinks, came over. She looked confused at me, and I shrugged. The lady then proceeded to ask if the waitress was the manager, and she told her she was. The lady explained my unacceptable, rude, disrespectful, and frankly shameful behavior. The waitress backed me up and said I didn't work there and she wouldn't have asked me to bring her a drink. The waitress backed me up and said I explained to her multiple times I couldn't do that. The lady ended up having to pay for the Shirley Temple because she took a drink of it. After she left, the waitress looked at me and asked why I gave her a Shirley Temple after she finished laughing. I told her it was the dishwasher's idea. "Snitch," he responded as we were standing near the window. My dad finally came out of the office and asked why we were laughing. I gave him his hat back and told him to stop giving me his stuff. We explained the whole thing to him. He found it hilarious. My mom, on the other hand, scolded me a little, but she was laughing too. Thank you for tuning in to today's episode. If you enjoyed these stories, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more amazing content. We love hearing your thoughts, so drop a comment below and let us know which story was your favorite. And as always, stay tuned for more real-life stories next time. See you soon.